Do we have everyone admitted?
Yes, we do.
All right. Welcome, everyone. This is the August 4th meeting of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. We're excited to see all of the participants participating via Zoom. My name is Jeff Robbins. I'm chair of the commission, and we will start by taking roll call. Secretary Larson.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Here.
Commissioner Putnam. One moment, Commissioner Putnam. We'll make sure that you're unmuted. There you are. Sorry, Commissioner.
No worries. Good morning.
Good morning. And Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 7 out of 7 commissioners present.
Excellent. Thank you for all the commissioners for your attendance. First on our agenda is public comment, and the public comment is limited today to the mill levy rulemaking, which is the topic of the commission's agenda today. So we will not be taking public comment on other matters, but we will be taking public comment on the mill levy rulemaking. Would remind everyone that next week, I think it is, Ms. Larson, we will have public comment during the evening so that we can allow the commissioners to hear from our stakeholders and constituents. And so we're looking forward to that. So Ms. Larson, do you want to identify the folks that have signed up for public comment, and then we can give them 5 minutes each?
Certainly. We have 2 members of the public, Commissioner Elise Jones and Commissioner Matt Jones, who have signed up for public comment. So we can begin with Commissioner Elise Jones.
Ms. Jones, I believe you're going to be unmuted, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, let me just start by saying good morning and thank you for the opportunity to comment. I want to say welcome to the new professional commission and thank each of you for your very important service that you're providing to the people of Colorado. I know this work isn't easy, and we really appreciate your willingness to really roll up your sleeves and do this very challenging job. As a county commissioner from Boulder County, I want to underscore just how important the CRGCC's work is to my constituents. They're counting on you to fulfill your new charge under Senate Bill 181 and to protect public health, safety, and welfare and the environment and wildlife. And to accomplish that important mission, the commission must have adequate budget and staffing. So I'm speaking today to express my strong support for your proposal to raise the conservation levy to the full 1.7 mils allowed under state law. Those funds are absolutely necessary to cover the costs associated with fulfilling your SB 181 responsibilities. And this is critical to Boulder County because really few issues unite our residents like their concern about the impacts that oil and gas drilling can have and are having on public health, environmental well-being, economic prosperity, and the quality of life here in our county. We're already experiencing local impacts from the climate crisis in the form of increased drought pressure, more wildfire danger, warmer temperatures, extreme weather events. Indeed, we are still rebuilding our roads this summer, the roads that were damaged 7 years ago in the 2013 floods, which is an event that was exacerbated by a warming climate. Oil and gas emissions are also a top contributor to why we remain out of attainment with the ozone standard. As you probably know, on July 11th, the ozone monitor at NREL hit levels that qualify the metro region to move to severe non-attainment status. And concerns about poor air quality are further heightened during this respiratory pandemic, since health impacts from COVID-19 are worsened in areas with greater air pollution. So we really need the CRGCC to be operating on all cylinders to address these issues and to protect our health and environment. And you need adequate funding to do this, to conduct inspections and ensure enforcement of state regs, to investigate alleged violations, to continue to plug and abandon orphan wells, which is a problem that's only going to get worse in the current economic climate. We need you to have funds to strengthen and enforce safety practices to prevent fires and explosions, which we are all painfully aware have caused injury and even death to workers and community members. And also to address the ongoing problems of spills, which, as we know, can contaminate land and water, and there were over 600 last year. Bottom line is the COGCC can't do its job if it doesn't have the funds to do it, and the people of Colorado are really counting on you to do your job. So please adopt this rule to raise the levy to the full 1.7 mils. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I appreciate your testimony to us this morning. Ms. Larson, if you could unmute Matt Jones, Commissioner from Boulder County as well, I believe.
Good morning,
Yes.
everybody. My name is Matt Jones. I'm a Boulder County Commissioner. Thanks for doing the testimony and doing this rule change, which I think is badly overdue. And I think if we don't go to the 1.7 mils, we'll have failed in having enough staffing and protections, financial protections for Colorado's taxpayers. Why I say this, I served in the State House and Senate for 8 years on my second stint. I did 6 years before that. And I ran 18 oil and gas protection bills in that time. A lot of what you see in Senate Bill 181, we ran the traps on, particularly Senator Foote, then Representative Foote. And I learned a lot. I learned that in 2011, when I was for my first year, the Ryder well in Longmont had benzene in the groundwater 100 times normal, at 250 feet from Trail Ridge Middle School. And it had been inspected twice in the previous 3 years. Inspections weren't working, so we went to work on trying to get more inspectors, and also did a study in 2013 and passed a bill to say, what is the best time to inspect? And what they found was stuff under the ground, things you don't see, the piping was the problem. And we have a lot more, we double basically through work year after year to double the number of inspectors, but it is still not enough. The inspections are cursory. You need the full mill to pay for that. The same is true on your permitting. I asked staff at one point, I said, what do you do in permitting for your environmental review? Oh, I open up the computer, I bring up a couple layers of information on a GIS system, and I check the box and we issue the permit. It's very cursory. You need staff to look into these things to make sure that they work. That's true of enforcement as well. The COG, the fine, the record fine you did at the Firestone explosion was a result of a bill that then Representative Foote and myself ran twice to get passed. And you need to have the people to go out and enforce, because what happens often in these things, like with groundwater pollution, they'll point at each other because they're nearby, and it's hard to prove things. So you need staffing for that. And then I learned later, the big problem we have with orphan wells and the financial liability we're going to pass off to taxpayers if we don't act now. The current then COGC director, who I thought was more on the industry side of things, sounded the alarm. And it was because of the huge liability the state has under this. And he had no way to figure out what the financing was. I asked another staffer, I said, what do you review for financial solvency for these corporations? We don't do that. We don't have any staff to do that. Have you hired people to do that? That's what you need to be doing up front, especially in a frame where we have things, companies like Extraction going bankrupt. I can't see how you permit them on anything until that is resolved. And even then, given their track record, that would be a tough thing for myself to approve a permit. But if we don't do this with the mill and put the money aside and start addressing this problem, we're going to pass it off to taxpayers. Some general fund subsidy did come to the COGC in recent years. And the director at the time didn't know the finances, so the only thing they could use was who's behind in their permitting. And they uncovered it was far more than they thought. And so we have 50,000 plus wells in the state, a lot of them older, a lot of them passed off to other companies. And if the industry doesn't pay for that, the taxpayers you will. And the only way the industry pays for that is through this mill and fines and things like that. So you need to do this as your first act as a professional commission. I'm glad it's to this place. A lot of work went into getting it here, and Senate Bill 181 and the protections in there that are involved in that. And for you to do that job, to protect, you need to have the whole 1.7. I saw in the paper 1.5 is enough. No way. It's just not going to happen. Sorry, I had something pop up on my screen. Oh. There we are. Sorry. So I ask you, having gone through this battle for 8 years in the legislature, to get to where we are, you need that's your primary job, your only job is to protect people, their health and their tax paying into the state government. Industry should pay for this, not taxpayers. Please pass the 1.7. This is your inaugural vote. You will send a message here. And I hope it's one that says, we're now primarily, number one, protecting Coloradans, their health, and their wallets.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones, for those comments. We appreciate hearing from both commissioners from Boulder County. Ms. Larson, did we have anyone else signed up for a public comment?
We did not.
All right, well then we will close public comment, and we are well ahead of time. I would suggest to commissioners that we move into staff presentation at this point. Ms. Murphy, as director, are you going to be doing staff presentation?
Chair, thank you. Yes, I am, and I believe we have both Wendy Schultz, our brought out of retirement finance director, and also Kat Alukaton, our acting finance manager, available for people who have questions that I sure as heck can't answer. And with that, I'm happy to jump in, Chair, or do you want to check in with the other commissioners?
I think we've got a big thumbs up from everybody. We look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Give me just a moment as I share my screen. Great. Welcome, commissioners, parties, stakeholders, and I think anybody else who's paying attention. My name is Julie Murphy. I'm the director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and I'm here today to present to the commission staff's requested increase to the conservation levy or mill levy. I'll probably use those terms interchangeably today. To run through what we're going to talk about, I have a very brief presentation. I wanted to talk about our statutory authority, staff's proposed draft rule, kind of a recap over Crgcc's finances, to talk a little bit about the purpose of the rulemaking and why we're here, and then to close out with a response to some of the party comments. And please interrupt me at any point if you have questions. So jumping in first, 3460-122 of Colorado Revised Statutes authorizes this commission to adjust the mill levy rate up to a statutory cap of 1.7 mils at time to time as required. So we have flexibility under that cap to accomplish a change in the mill levy through rulemaking. I wanted to jump into talking about what our proposed requested increase is today. I've circled the kind of pertinent language in yellow on the screen. And when we initially noticed this rulemaking, staff had requested an increase to the mill levy to 1.7 mils, which is $0.0017. However, as the price and production change, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, staff has revised its request to the commissioners to increase the mill from the existing 1.1 mils to 1.5 mils. We also, on this slide, it's important to note that the October 1, 2020 is also a change to identify what date the increase in the mill levy would become effective. And so this SNP language is from staff's July 24th proposed draft rule. So to kind of reiterate, staff is requesting an increase to 1.5 mils or 0.0015, and would request that the commission make the change to also impose that charge as of October 1st, 2020. So those are the two changes to the proposed rule language. To talk a little bit about how we got here, staff noticed the rulemaking on June 30th. Staff conducted a stakeholder meeting on July 8th. Party filings, pre-hearing statements and responses were due on July 20th and July 27th respectively. We also requested that written public comments be submitted to the Commission on July 27th. All of that information is available on the Commission's website for the mill levy rulemaking hearing. Turning now to an intro to CRGCC's finances. For the benefit of everybody, I want to remind folks that CRGCC has not received and does not receive general fund revenues. We are funded entirely through the Severance Tax Operational Fund and the Oil and Gas Conservation and Environmental Response Fund, which has historically been known as the OGSRF, which is an impossible acronym, and so instead we're trying to refer to it as the fund, and I'll probably do that today. About 25% of our revenue sources are from the Severance Tax Operational Fund, which is revenues received from severance taxes. About 75% of our revenues are billed or booked to the Oil and Gas Conservation Environmental Response Fund. The revenue sources for the fund include the Conservation Mill Levy, penalties, a federal underground injection control grant, and bond claims. And for a little bit of context, about 65% of CRGCC's total revenue is derived from the Conservation Mill Levy. With that, turning to how is the levy revenue calculated, it is a combination of the sales value multiplied by the levy rate to generate levy revenue. Sales value is calculated by multiplying the volume of commodity produced by the price at which the commodity is sold. So to summarize, $10 million in sales value would generate about $11,000 in levy revenue at a 1.1 mill conservation rate. So jumping now into the purpose of CRGCC's rulemaking, we're looking to bring stability to our cash fund after the drop in commodity prices and production that it took place in what we consider the fourth quarter of the fiscal year last year, or in the kind of March, April, May timeframe of 2020. Again, because of drops in production and commodity price, it affects the overall levy revenue. We've had an incredibly well-managed fund over the course of the last 13 years, courtesy of Wendy Schultz. And so we had sufficient reserves to offset the drops in commodity price and production that decreased the amount of levy revenue we received. And now as we look forward, we'd like to stabilize our fund and revenue sources. So to kind of bring everybody up to speed on how CRGCC projects revenues, we generally look at the conservation levy rate, which you can see in yellow on this slide. And to be clear, this slide is pulled directly from staff's cost benefit analysis that was prepared and posted as required by Colorado Revised Statutes on the 24th of July. And this is what also helped articulate staff's revised projected increase or requested increase. We take the spot price, which is for the commodity, whether it's the oil price or the gas price, multiply it by what we anticipate production to be. And this is based on kind of our engineers looking at a number of different data points, both in the public, both in documents that we receive from operators, and then multiplying that and looking to see what that projects out over the fiscal year. So this table reflects our projections for next fiscal year, the fiscal year we're in right now. I misspoke, for 2020 and 2021. The first quarter, we will have the same as existing mill levy rate of 1.1. We're hoping, and with action today, the Commission will increase that levy rate to 1.5. So this, again, to summarize, this table summarizes what we project we will receive. One important note I want to make, the table does not include about $500,000 in revenues that we receive from carbon dioxide. So, but we wanted to include the primary drivers of revenue, which are oil and gas. We do also reflect the 4 assumptions that staff has made in this table. And I'm happy to take questions about it, but either now or later. And without seeing anybody just jumping up and down, I'll move forward. I have been told by other folks who've reviewed this presentation that this table is not entirely intuitive. So bear with me a little bit as we walk through it. What I wanted to illustrate for the commissioners and our stakeholders is how staff's revenue projections have evolved over the course of the last 13 months. We have three important projections that I want to talk about: the July 2019, the June 2020 projection, and then the July 2020 projection, which is the one that we just released in concert with the cost benefit analysis on July 24th, 2020. So if we start with the blue column, July 2019, what it shows is that for fiscal year 2019-2020, at a mill levy rate of 1.1, staff projected receiving approximately $14.8 million in levy revenue. That same projection showed that for 2021, at a mill levy rate of 1.1, staff would, or the commission would receive approximately $14.6 million from the conservation levy. Moving forward to June 2020, and this is the first projection we prepared and then published as part of the notice for the mill levy increase, you can see a fairly significant drop in what we projected we would receive for 2019 and 2020 from the 14.8 to 13.6. The June 2020 projection also showed that that same mill levy rate of 1.1 would generate approximately $9.6 million in fiscal year 2021. And that is the number that gave us great concern and caused staff to request from the commission an increase in the mill levy rate. Prices and production stabilized, and so now as we look at, sorry, let me finish the June 2020 projection. So with the June 2020 projection, we also forecasted or projected out what staff anticipated receiving in mill levy revenue if the first quarter was at the same 1.1 mils, but because of commission action, the second through fourth quarters of fiscal year 2020-21 was at that should be 1.7. I have a couple. We projected that we would receive about $13.4 million. And so I would note that there's one error in the slide in that the $13.4 million projected for June 2020 was based on prices and production assuming an increase to 1.7. I apologize.
Ms. Murphy, the 1.5 reference there, that should be 1.7.
That should be 1.7 for the June 2020 projection.
Okay.
And then if we turn to July 2020, the July 2020 projection, it should be the 1.5. So thank you for the clarification, Chair. And I can walk through that one more time if it's confusing, and apologies again for an error on the slide. So then if we turn to the July 2020 projection, and again, this is the one that staff prepared and released a couple of weeks ago, and it is something that I had asked our staff to be prepared to review in advance of the hearing to make sure that we were coming forward to the commission with the best available information. And when we completed that exercise, we saw a couple of different things that are interesting as we compare June 2020 to July 2020. First, we saw a continued decline in the revenue projection to receive for fiscal year 2019 and 2020. And to be clear, that is still a projection because we had not closed out the fiscal year as of July 24th. I think we're very close or have completed that, and we can come back and present our closed out end of year information to the commissioners if you think it's worthwhile or you're interested in seeing it. So we saw kind of a further decline in 2019 and 2020, but also because prices and production had stabilized at higher numbers than we anticipated in June. In July, we projected that a 1.1 mill levy rate would generate closer to $12.5 million. As we kind of refined our analysis and looked at the overall health of the fund, we realized that staff would instead recommend an increase to 1.5 mils. And that is what you see in the bottom line in the lower right-hand box on the table is the 15.9 million. And that is what we project the mill levy revenues to be for fiscal year 2021 if the commission takes action and increases in the levy to 1.5 mils effective for the remaining 3/4 of the fiscal year. So it would apply to commodities produced on or after October 1st, 2020. So I just kind of wanted folks to see how the projections have fluctuated and why, despite the uptick in price of production, we still are before you requesting an increase. And so if we compare the $13.4 million from the June 2020 projection to the $12.5 million in the July 2020 projection, there's still a delta in what staff thinks we need to receive to maintain kind of our projected budget or spending path. And as you can see, there's also an increase over the $13.4 million projection for 2020 from June 2020 in the July 2020. And that we think is appropriate to stabilize our spending, which I'll jump into on this next slide. So this is a snapshot from our overall finances and revenue budget management tool that I fortunately don't have to work in every day, but understand at a high enough level to talk about today. So a couple of things that I want to start by pointing out is, first, if we look at the forecast for 2021, the numbers that you see on this screen are based on a projection that the Commission will take action and increase the mill to 1.5 mils. The next number I want to point out is, with that assumption, again, staff is projecting that the conservation levy will generate about $15.9 million over the fiscal year. And what does that mean for our overall budget health, or our financial health? The bottom line to me is kind of the most important data point as I'm looking at our budget and spending at a gross level. For me, the ending fund balance is a very important number because that reflects what we have to spend year to year. And so that it's important to keep in mind that revenues for a particular fiscal year are not due to our Commission until December 1st. And so there's a 5-month lag between revenues generated and revenues received. And so this ending fund balance is what helps us weather that storm. It also provides the ability to weather a storm where we see an unexpected drop in commodity prices and production, which we did see in fiscal year 1920. So what you can see in the reserve increase-decrease line in the estimated 1920 line is a $4.2 million decrease. So we spent about $4.2 million, or we project spending approximately $4.2 million in fiscal year 1920. As we had planned to spend approximately $2 million of that to maintain our reserve at an appropriate level. But we had the ability to spend an additional 2.2 because we had enough in the reserves. But so long story short, I want to see stability in that reserve line. And so as we move into 2021, we come into a much more reasonable kind of reserve spending. And as we look at that trend line, it's flattening instead of kind of increasing and decreasing somewhat precipitously. So that's why I think that bumping to 1.5 is appropriate. We want to stabilize the reserve spending. We want to offset some of the reserve spending we had to do in 1920 to accommodate the drops in the production, or drops in price and production that resulted in less than expected mill levy revenue. And overall, I think that this reflects the right balance of fiscal responsibility in terms of our spending, and also increasing in the levy in a way that preserves the long-term fund health. I'm happy to talk more about this if there are questions. There are a couple of things that are probably interesting in that, we jumped our spending fairly substantially between 1819 and 1920, and that reflects an increase in spending for the Orphan Well program in particular. But I also don't totally want to belabor the details of this, because I think some of the accounting folks might really enjoy it, and everybody else is ready to talk about bigger picture issues probably.
Ms. Murphy, I think Commissioner McGowan raised her hand.
Mr. Chair, Director Murphy, I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry if these are really basic, but one, back on the production slide, could you explain to me why we're assuming flat production for all the years? So the 40,000 and the 525, but just for my own, I don't understand. So
I think I'm going to try this at a high level, and then if we have
high level's good.
Okay. We have kind of a stable inventory of wells, and so if we think that they will continue to produce at a current rate, and there will be some additional wells being drilled to keep that a fairly constant number as compared to when we see new horizontal wells drilled. They have flush production for a year or two, so from somewhere between 1 and 3 years, so that bumps production dramatically, and then there's kind of a steep drop off. So we're thinking that those wells that are kind of a large volume of the production are going to maintain stability for the year. We don't expect to see huge increases in the number of wells drilled where we would see dramatic spikes in production. And we also don't project a huge fall off either over the course of the next fiscal year. And so we're doing these projections looking quarterly. So we're kind of trying to wrap it 3 months at a time to, again, estimate where those spot prices are going to be over the balance of the quarter and then the production is going to be. Does that?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. And then back to your last slide, could you explain to me how the revenues compare to what we've been appropriated by the General Assembly? So we obviously can't collect more than we've been appropriated, correct?
We cannot.
Or are we different?
We cannot carry more than 50% of what we've been appropriated year to year. And so that's our, I'm trying to find, uncommitted reserves cannot exceed 50% of what we've been appropriated. Roughly, our ending fund balance is comparable to the uncommitted reserves number. And so that's the number. If we look at the ending fund balance, those are the actual dollars in our account. We don't want that to be more than about 50% of what we've been appropriated. And that's also what prevents us from building up just a giant fund of unspent dollars. So we're managing it on both ends, right? We don't want too little, we don't want too much. It's kind of the magical Goldilocks number.
Okay. And then, sorry, one last question, if it's okay, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I'm looking at my, some of the comments in the pre-hearing testimony were about sunsetting this, which I'm not necessarily sure I agree with, but I wanted to know, can we revisit the mill levy whenever we feel that it's appropriate? So if for some reason gas prices really go up, we can revisit and say, now we're collecting too much and we're going to hit that 50% cap on the reserve, and so we need to adjust accordingly, or vice versa. If we're not collecting enough, we can revisit and go back up and revisit the 1.7.
Commissioner McGowan, my understanding is that it's within your power to adjust the mill levy however you as commissioners see fit, so long as we do it via a rulemaking. But I think if AAG Davenport wants to provide any context.
And I assume that budget will keep an eye on things and tell us if we're like not going to meet expectations or we're collecting too much, and then we can adjust.
Correct. Our staff is working on projections, I would say monthly to quarterly, kind of depending on the volatility that we're seeing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Messner.
Thank you. So, Commissioner McGowan, thanks for bringing up the reserve, because I had a couple of questions about that as well, and I did understand that there was a 50% cap on what we can carry in the reserve. Help me understand a little bit. It's 50% of projected operating budget, or it's 50% of actual operating budget, or 50% of what is appropriated by the legislature?
It's 50% of what's appropriated by the legislature.
And so that 50% that's appropriated, or the amount of money that is appropriated by the legislature, is determined how?
Largely through the long bill.
Okay. But I mean, based on information that's provided by the COGCC, correct?
Right.
So,
right. Right.
So, I mean, if we're actually anticipating higher expenses in future years and we need to, increase what's appropriated in the long bill, that would affect what that 50% bottom line would be. So I'm looking at fiscal year 18-19, and I would assume because we were carrying a significantly higher fund balance in there that there was probably more appropriated in the long bill, so that we were staying within that 50% threshold.
Right. And so if we, sorry, Commissioner.
No, go ahead.
If we keep in mind that in fiscal year 18-19 is when Senate Bill 181 was passed, and it included a fiscal note to account for a dramatic increase in staffing numbers. And then you see all of a sudden, the total expenditures jump significantly between 18 and 19. We had orphan well spending, and we also had FTE from Senate Bill 1981. And so just to kind of track how those two numbers have moved and why there was an increase in expenditures. And also we had a pretty significant bump, as you noted, in our an increase in our reserves, which we needed to spend down a little bit. We just didn't plan to spend it down by 4.2.
Sure. And just to make sure that I understand, in the perfect world, are we trying to be neutral on reserve increases, decreases, or do we anticipate that we're going to be going one direction or the other every year?
I think in a perfect world, if we're looking at no changes in planned expenditures, right? If the legislature decides to give us 100 more people or take 100 people away, we would need to adjust our reserves accordingly. My preference would be to have a fairly stable reserve spending. And of course, and then kind of the other piece that the reserves helps us navigate is the price and production volatility. Right. And so we went up without increasing our mill levy rate. Kind of, I think it was from like 2010 to 2018 and something in there. But our staffing increased dramatically, and we were able to absorb those costs without adjusting the mill because of increases in production, right? And so there's just a number of different factors that affect these pieces. And so our staff, that's why we watch it very closely, long story short. And I mean, we're watching our spending, we're watching our staffing, we're watching what the legislature may be doing so that we can be poised to manage to what we've been appropriated and what our expectations are.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Do we have other commissioners with questions?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Good morning, Ms. Murphy. How are you?
Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning. I have one question. I understand all the math here, and I think I'm on the right page with everything that's being discussed, with all the methodology, with the projections, et cetera. My question is, why would we keep so much money in the ending fund balance? Why do we carry that balance?
So we like to keep somewhere between north of 40% in our ending fund balance, because those are the dollars that help us move between fiscal years, because we don't have revenues that are booked back to the fiscal year until December 1st. And so we've kind of got a big lag time between the start of the fiscal year and the time we actually get dollars in the door. Does that help?
Yeah.
Why is that, Ms. Murphy?
Pardon me?
Why is that? Why is it that the monies don't roll in until December?
Can I move forward a couple of slides? I think that might help. So how the mill levy revenues work is that from, for example, January 1st through March 1st, if we look at line 1, production from January to March is not due to the commission until June 1st. And so, Commissioner Gonzalez, to answer your question, production for fiscal year 2021 started on July 1st, 2020, and runs through September 30th, 2020, but is not due to the commission until December 1st, 2020, if we look at that bottom line. And so does that help? I feel like I might start over answering at this point.
Well, I think that explains, how the money comes in and why we would have some sort of fund that could fund those months. But we're talking about 2 months out of the year when you're talking about September 30th to December 1st. And so I'm just curious why we need almost $10 million in the bank to carry over.
I think, but if we think about when it's actually due, we've got to cover expenses from July 1st through November 30th, which is 5 months of the fiscal year. 5/12 is less than 50%. And so I think that's part of the challenge. Is it's more the gap. That to me is the gap. I think it's probably possible we could trim that back a little bit. And I can talk to our financial team about that piece.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the other point is that it gives us a cushion against a volatile market.
Commissioner Gonzalez, did that answer your questions?
I understand why that fund is being kept and why we're carrying a balance. I still don't know that I'm totally satisfied with understanding why we have so much of a balance in there. So maybe I just need to see more math on that for now, or at some point. But I think I get the gist of what Director Murphy is communicating.
Thank you, Commissioner, and we're happy to have you sit down individually with our finance team to actually work through the numbers. I know that numbers are one of your strengths and not so much mine, or we can bring that forward to the entire commission and walk through in great detail, and close out our fiscal year, which was closed out from 1920, to really get into the details. So please let me know how we can support you in understanding how we have to operate.
Yeah. Additionally, one question I have is because I'm looking at these, through my own lens and through the lens of the pre-hearing statements that accompanied this rulemaking endeavor. And I don't know that I saw any objections to A, the COGCC budget, to B, the methodology for price production or price projections, or to C, anything related to the ending fund balance projections. So, it's really for my understanding, and I want to make sure that we ask the question, but it doesn't seem like we had any strong feelings on that one way or another from all the materials that were presented in preparation for this. Is that correct, Director Murphy?
I think that's a wonderful summary of the situation. I tend to think that we've worked very closely with stakeholders and a diverse group of them on our budget needs, and are always recognizing the need to say what I've already said, kind of in that Goldilocks space. We don't want too much revenue to come in. We're statutorily capped, and it's not fiscally responsible in my estimation. At the same time, we don't want to spend down so low that we're at the risk of not being able to pay our bills at the end of the fiscal year. And so it is a special thing to manage, in my estimation, given the changes in price and production. I mean, no one in the state of Colorado has control over the prices. Operators have a degree of control over production, and I think you could probably explain that better than I could, Commissioner Gonzalez. What we can control is spending, and yet it is imperative that we continue to carry out the objectives of the Act. So with those kind of 3 or 4 different parameters, we have taken historically, and I would continue to take, subject to the Commission's revising or redirecting us, a conservative approach, whether increasing or decreasing the mill. Because, and kind of jumping back into my presentation, there's a 9-month lag for us to actually receive funds from a change in the mill levy. This is the most quick, I know that's terrible English, but this is the quickest process we've put forward to receive mill levy in my experience with the Commission. Granted, we've only done it twice, so that's not a great data set, but this to me really illustrates the interrelationship of the Administrative Procedure Act and the Commission rules in terms of the delay. So the hearing process for this rulemaking is on about the tightest schedule imaginable, from the day it was noticed to the day the rule can take effect. And even with that, and then butting that kind of effective date on September 30th right up against the date the new levy would apply to production. We're looking at a 9-month lag between noticing the rulemaking and actually receiving revenues. So that to me is countenances, conservative, thoughtful approaches on how we adjust our mill and when we adjust it. It's not something that we can adjust on the fly as quickly as spot prices adjust. And thank God for that, because I don't think there's enough like Vicodin or whatever sedative you need to be able to weather the storm of spot prices. And so again, kind of just jumping into the party comments, the concern about timing. On June 30th, we noticed this rulemaking, which was, according to the Secretary of State's online calculator, which was one of the most amazing tools I've ever come across in state government. The last day to file the notice for an October 1 effective date, which is a date we need our changes in the levy to be effective on the quarters. June 30th was the last day to do it. We snuck it under the wire and got it done. We could have done this hearing as early as July 30th, but we thought giving the commissioners a little more time to settle in was appropriate. But the last day we could conduct this hearing was August 11th, again, for that September 30th, October 1st effective date. And yet, so again, to reiterate a point, the increase in the mill levy, if it's adopted, will apply to production or commodities produced beginning October 1st, 2020. The revenues from oil and gas produced from October 1st through December 30th are not due to the commission until March 1st. So again, just trying to illustrate that 9-month lag between when we notice a mill levy increase and then when it actually results in revenues to be received.
Director Murphy?
Yep.
Kudos to you and staff for your nimbleness in getting this put together. It is really necessary, and there are a lot of statutory constraints, and I, for one, appreciate the work that you and your finance staff have put together, as well as your nimbleness in recognizing that the original proposed 1.7 was potentially not necessary. And we'll look forward to hearing from all the parties about those issues here in just a bit. But thank you for that work.
Thank you, Chair. This is the work of Mike Hickey, Wendy Schultz, and Kat Alukutan. I'm here delivering it, but it is their hard work, and I'm exceedingly grateful to them for their perseverance through it. Some of the parties have asked for a sunset. I personally don't think it's appropriate for a couple of reasons. I don't have quarterly projections that would support a sunset. We're looking at next fiscal year, looking into 2022 makes me a little bit nervous. Secondly, we at the staff level have historically and will continue to review our quarterly projections regularly. And as we see concerns, we will bring those forward. Again, whether we've pegged the mill levy too high or whether it's too low. I think one of the advantages of moving to 1.5 mils is that we have flexibility to respond if there is a deeper downturn or not. And if prices rebound or commodity or production rebounds more quickly, we will come to you with that information. Again, we're trying to maintain a steady state without swinging too wildly one direction or the other. And so with that concludes my presentation. I've given the appropriate shout out to our team. I just can't reiterate the help and support and wisdom that these folks have in trying to put together a pretty wild projection experience. So with that, I'm happy to take more questions.
Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry. So to the point of the folks who did public comment earlier, with the 1.5, do you feel like we're going to be able to meet our statutory requirements and obligations? I heard concern on that front. And I also want to, I know that folks are, I wonder if you could address a little bit. I know that we tightened our belt too. We've been holding off on hiring some staff, trying to reduce the burden from our perspective, of staff costs, et cetera. But I want to make sure that even in doing that, we're still able to meet our statutory obligations and do what the commission and the staff all need to accomplish. So I wonder if you could address that, Director Murphy, a little bit.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner McGowan. And we did put out a fact sheet at the end, or I think the beginning of August, end of July, beginning of August, kind of talking about the pieces that we were undertaking to exhibit our own fiscal responsibility or belt tightening. And I think that those measures continue to be important as a tool for a couple of reasons. One, the department itself is scrutinizing hirings at this point in time, given some of the statewide challenges to budget. And so we're supportive of that initiative and making sure we're doing our part as well. We've had a number of these vacancies open for a while. An unintended opportunity, I think, of holding some of these vacancies open is that I think that you commissioners are on the verge of retooling our workload in a way. And having some flexibility in open FTEs allows us to flex with your revised vision for how we as an organization will operate. And so I think that there's an opportunity there to see where we need people as we move forward. And all of that to say, I think it's appropriate to hold those positions open. Our highest priority, highest public health, safety, welfare positions would continue to be backfilled. I think that they are all filled currently. Our inspectors are the priority on that front. We want our folks out in the field monitoring what's going on. And so, yes, I think holding those vacancies open is appropriate for those couple of reasons. And yes, I think with the increase to 1.5, we meet our needs. We have increased our revenue year over year as compared to last year, which is good to decrease pressure on our cash fund. But again, to me, it reflects kind of the appropriate amount of increase and reduced spending to be good fiscal stewards, as well as while we carry out the requirements of the Act.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add too, I mean, just so everyone knows, big picture budget, you know, the DNR is a very, very lean organization overall. And under the budget scenarios that we were given, just like all agencies, we were required to submit a minus 10% reduction. And then the JBC, the Joint Budget Committee, on top of that, gave us direction on a 5% personal services reduction as well. So you add those two together, you know, 15%, that's a lot. So we have not only in COGCC, but other of our divisions within the DNR, we have hiring freezes, and literally every position that we're contemplating eventually gets to me and whether or not I decided or not to move forward. So that's the extreme nature that the whole organization is under right now. So just to give everyone a background on that. But my question is just kind of thinking back to, you know, how long have we had this 1.1 mil in place? When was the last time that was changed? And, you know, when I was a legislator, I was there for some of the last, you know, fiscal years that were quite challenging of the downturn, you know, 2008, 2009. Did we, you know, contemplate then any changes? And I know it's a totally different landscape too. I mean, we saw about $1 billion less revenue in, I think, 2009-ish. And now, you know, we saw over a $3 billion decrease in revenue. So it's just a very different landscape. But I was just curious when the last time we've contemplated that, and then did it change, and did it go back up or down, or?
Thank you, Commissioner. I would need to pull up some notes on the kind of the historical perspective on the mill levy changes. I know that the most recent adjustment, and we moved from 0.7 mils to 1.1 mils, was in the fourth calendar quarter of 2018. So I think we initiated that rulemaking in December-ish, completed it early January, and it was effective April 1st, 2019. And my understanding, and again, I would actually need to go back and look at more specific information, is that for the preceding decade or so, I want to say, the mill levy had been largely constant. And so the commission had been able to weather the storm through a pretty significant drop in prices in the 2014, 2015 era. That was a remarkable drop in price for the industry. Was able to weather that storm because production maintained at incredibly high levels and continued to increase, actually. And so that neutralized the effect of the price drop, such that the revenues themselves were stable, and the production was increasing at a rate that also accommodated the increasing in our staff levels through those years. So, but my understanding is that historically, the commission has adjusted this mill fairly frequently in response to changing needs and or revenue streams. This kind of lull in change has been a little bit different, as I understand it. And again, I can get more detailed information. I think the pre-hearing statement from Conservation Colorado actually detailed some of the history of this, and I just don't have the details at the tips of my tongue or fingers right now. I mean, I could, but then everybody would have to see all my internet research, and it's a little bit awkward. So,
Director Murphy, I have the Conservation Colorado pre-hearing statement with the table on page 4. I didn't go gut check it, but I assume it's correct. And you're right. We increased the mill March 8th of 2018 to 0.11, and previous to that was in 2007. There was an increase from 0.5 to 0.7, and it looks like back in the 80s and 90s, it increased and decreased all over the place, but we've been pretty consistent up until 2018.
Thanks, Chair, for the life preserver.
Well, easy for me to have my notes. You're doing a great job with the presentation. Do we have other commissioners with questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Messner.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Murphy, Director Murphy. I do want to say, how important it is for me to carry a reserve, and coming from local government and also coming from business, I think it's very common and actually incredibly fiscally responsible to carry a reserve. And I think that does enable organizations to be able to still provide the services that they need to provide in order to meet the mission of the organization, through fluctuating commodity prices, through fluctuating demand, through fluctuating budget scenarios. And so, having looked at the budget now, having looked at it historically, I do see a lot of responsibility that has been taken by the COGCC to be responsible with the budget and be responsible with that reserve, and not get carried away, and also be responsible with adjusting mills as necessary. And so whether those are up or whether those are down, I think that is a tool that the commission has in order to be able to ensure that we are keeping a budget that is reasonable and necessary, as well as continuing to provide the additional services that are required as we evolve the mission of the COGCC in implementation of SB 19181. And that ends up being a really big responsibility. And I think that at least what I'm seeing over the last couple of years and what I see projecting forward is that acknowledgement of that responsibility and that change in mission, and how that would potentially affect the budget. And so I do want to just acknowledge staff for at least what I'm seeing as a really pragmatic and responsible approach to the budget.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. Unless there are other questions, I had a couple of questions, Director Murphy, if I could. The record before us contains the cost-benefit analysis dated July 24th, 2020. That's something staff put together, is that right?
Yes, Chair.
And did staff do that on their own volition, or what why do we have a cost-benefit analysis, and do we always have to have one?
Those are great questions, and I might, I'll certainly also ask AAG Davenport if he has anything to contribute. A cost-benefit analysis is a tool that any person in the state of Colorado can request an agency to prepare as part of a rulemaking process. And so we received a request for a cost-benefit analysis right around, I think, July 5th or 10th. I don't recall the day, but and then the actual cost-benefit analysis needs to be prepared and posted 15 days before the hearing, which for us was, I think, the 27th, maybe the 26th, 25th of July, and we decided to get it out on Friday beforehand to make sure that we were in very full compliance with the requirements of the statutory provision, which of course I can't recall at the current point in time. I think it's in the Administrative Procedure Act. It just so happened that the preparation of the cost-benefit analysis coincided with my request to staff that staff revisit our projections in the middle of July so that we would be prepared to come forward to the commission itself with the best information available to us. It was fortuitous. I will probably never say this about a cost-benefit analysis again, but it was fortuitous timing in that we had the opportunity through the cost-benefit analysis to articulate the support for staff's revised requested increase. And so the two events were independent of each other, but came together in a way that was particularly helpful for this rulemaking.
And
does that answer your question, Chair?
It does, and just for the record, so the cost-benefit analysis analyzes the proposed 0.15 as opposed to the 0.17. Is that right?
With one clarification, it's 1.5 and 1.7. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that. And who requested the cost-benefit analysis?
I believe it was the Colorado Oil and Gas Association.
Thank you. And then one final procedural question. The proposed Rule 310 changed to 1.5, right? And have we edited the statement in basis and purpose to reflect that at this point?
We have not, Chair.
Okay, so we'll just need to, as we deliberate, make sure that we don't drop that piece.
Correct. And I know our AAGs will be on the spot, keeping us out of hot water on that front. And so I've put staff's proposed rule language 310 back on the screen. Again, this only shows the requested increase to the mill levy rate. There is also a requested change to the date it's imposed, making it October 1st, 2020, where currently it reads April 1st, 2018.
Thank you, Director Murphy.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Attorney General Davenport.
I'm sorry, just one very brief supplement to what Director Murphy said. For the Commissioner's edification, the statutory site for the cost-benefit analysis is 244103, subsection 2.5A, and that is in Colorado's Administrative Procedure Act.
Thank you for that clarification, Attorney General Davenport.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Commissioner Nanjava.
Hi, thank you so much, and good morning, Director Murphy. Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate all the information that you shared. I had several of the same questions that my fellow commissioners had asked previously, so I tend to be a beat behind, but I really appreciate those questions being asked. In particular, Commissioner McGowan had asked about the ability for us to take up this issue in the future, regardless of where we land today, and that you had mentioned that the staff would be preparing budgetary information for us. Is that something that we can request on a regular basis, or perhaps plan to have on a regular basis to be able to evaluate whether we need to make a change again?
Commissioner, I think that's a great question. I know historically we haven't, as an agency, presented that information to the commission itself, but I'm more than happy, and I think it's a great option to present it to you at the frequency or with whatever you as a body think is appropriate in terms of checking in on this issue. We can bring it forward upon request or at regularly scheduled frequencies. I mean, short of you probably don't want weekly updates, and I'm not sure we have the ability to prepare them weekly, but.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I look forward to discussing with the rest of the commissioners in terms of whether they feel that this would be beneficial and the frequency thereof. I also just wanted to thank you, having been involved in budgeting as a director of operations of a small entity. I appreciate, the need for the projections, just the complexity that sometimes goes into that, and the need for the reserves when you're anticipating income that doesn't come for some time period. So again, really appreciate all the work that you and staff have done in putting this information together, and especially appreciate the reevaluation that came with the cost benefit analysis and your own interest in making sure that we had the most current information. I think it's useful to know that we have we have some room to fluctuate one way or the other, given the information that you provided, and I think that's very useful. So thank you so much for all of the effort that you've put in.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Hear, hear. Anything else from commissioners? I'm trying to find all of you. You're not all on my homepage, so just speak up. If looks like everybody's in a pretty good spot with the staff presentation. Again, thank you again, Director Murphy. It's 10:10. Next on our agenda is, well, we had it scheduled at 10:30 break, and then staff party presentation is next. Would commissioners like to take 5 now or start into party presentation? Thumbs up
for me.
So 5. Let's take 5 minutes and just regroup here at 10:15, and then we'll get started with party presentation. API is up first, so give Mr. Martin a heads up, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody in 5 minutes. All right, we're at 10:16. I think most commissioners appear to be back in the room. Ms. Larson, if you could let us know where we move from here.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Next up is API, represented by Mr. Jim Martin. And each party has 2 minutes to make remarks. So we'll go ahead and unmute Mr. Martin and start with party presentations. So give us one moment while we do that. Mr. Martin, you should be unmuted.
Good morning, Ms. Larson. This is Jim Martin from Beatty and Wozniak on behalf of API Colorado. Carrie Hackenberger is actually going to do our presentation this morning, if you wouldn't mind unmuting her.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Hackenberger, you should be ready to go.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Carrie Hackenberger, and I'm with the American Petroleum Institute, Colorado. API Colorado represents all facets of the natural gas and oil industry. Our more than 600 members produce, process, and distribute most of the nation's energy. In our first 100 years, API has developed more than 700 standards to enhance operational and environmental safety, efficiency, and sustainability. API Colorado is committed to ensuring a strong, viable industry capable of meeting the energy needs of the state in a safe and environmentally responsible manner. API Colorado appreciates the opportunity to participate in the mill levy rulemaking being considered today. To start, we would like to acknowledge our appreciation of the staff's adjustment of the mill levy down to 1.5 mils from the originally proposed 1.7 mils. API Colorado supports the need to fully fund the COGCC to ensure the Commission can properly regulate the responsible development, production, and utilization of the state's natural gas and oil resources, while simultaneously ensuring the protection of public health, safety, welfare, and the environment. With that being said, we would like to acknowledge that industry is concerned about the impact of this increase during these times. Colorado's natural gas and oil industry is facing unprecedented challenges with the drastic decrease in demand amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing drop in commodity pricing. At the same time, the industry is undergoing a complete regulatory framework overhaul. Requiring operators to internalize higher costs associated with an increase in the mill levy at this time could further dampen production and therefore revenues. Because of this, API Colorado encourages this conversation be a fluid one, and that as the landscape changes, the Commission reevaluate the increase in the mill levy and adjust accordingly. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hackenberger and Mr. Martin, for API's presentation. Commissioners, do we have questions for either Ms. Hackenberger or Mr. Martin? Seeing none, I guess I have just a follow-up question, Ms. Hackenberger. So is API supportive of the 1.5 increase at this point in time, with the understanding that the commissioners should look at this mill levy in a fluid manner, and if the landscape changes, we should reconsider where we're at?
Yes, I believe we are comfortable with the 1.5 and would just encourage that ongoing conversation and reevaluation as needed.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I'm not seeing other commissioners with questions. If you have questions, commissioners, do pipe up. I can see some of you, but not all of you. Ms. Larson, I believe that we would then move to Karis. Is that right?
That is correct. And we have with us Ms. Holly Hill from Karis. We'll unmute Ms. Hill and allow comments from that party.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Good morning, Commissioners and Director Murphy. I'm Holly Hill, Regulatory Manager for Karis, and Karis wishes to bestow our 2-minute remarks to the Colorado Oil and Gas Association.
Okay, Ms. Larson and commissioners, I'm comfortable with that. Or is everyone okay with that? Allowing Karis to provide COGO with their additional 2 minutes. So thumbs up on that. Okay. Next, we have Conservation Colorado, Logic, and Western Colorado Alliance. I believe that's Mr. Samuelson.
Yes, it is. And Mr. Samuelson, you are unmuted.
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Larson. Good morning, commissioners and staff. My name is Matt Samuelson, and I represent Conservation Colorado, the League of Oil and Gas Impacted Coloradoans, and Western Colorado Alliance. First of all, I want to thank the COGCC staff for their work and the analysis on the conservation levy fee. We know there's a lot on your plate, particularly with the upcoming mission change rulemaking in less than 3 weeks. The three organizations strongly support increasing the conservation fee rate to 1.5 mils. They support that rate increase because they support the important work the agency does and its mission to protect the health and safety of Coloradans and the state's environment and wildlife resources. To protect these resources requires proper budgetary resources. We support the proposed rate because the conservation levy is the most important funding mechanism that the agency possesses. As we heard from Director Murphy earlier, the COGCC does not receive funding from the state's general fund, and that this fee is responsible for about 2/3 of the agency's annual budget. Getting the rate right means the agency functions correctly, and this is of particular importance as the multitude of rulemakings associated with Senate Bill 181 are promulgated and then implemented. I essentially just want to highlight 2 points from our pre-hearing and response statements. The first one is that, just getting to the point that the commission does frequently adjust the conservation levy rate, and because of that, there's not a need for a sunset provision. We did include in our pre-hearing statement a chart that shows that if you go back to 1986, that this will be the 12th time the commission has undertaken a rulemaking to adjust the levy rate. If you add in rulemakings to adjust fees, that's another 4 occasions. And so even though it's been a little while, we had a rulemaking 2 years ago for the mill levy, and prior to that was 2007, that there is a history of adjusting this rate as needed. The fees, we haven't had a fee since 1999, and on Director Murphy's chart, there was in the revenue column that it did say it had a line item for Senate Bill 19-181 permit fees that was at 0. And I suspect that's a conversation we'll all get to have in the months coming up. The second point I just wanted to make has already kind of been put forward, but it's really getting to the fact that this is an appropriate time for this rulemaking because the impacts of this change will not be realized in dollars coming into the agency until March 1st of 21. Director Murphy has already gone over this in great detail, but we just want to highlight
Mr. Samuelson, you froze.
That because there is that lag. That point is that, I'm sorry, did you guys lose me?
Yeah, just if you could make that last point one last time there.
Sure. Most of us don't often talk in terms of mills and what that rate means. And so, just for an example, what I was thinking about is that this proposed rate is the equivalent of an extra 40 cents per $1,000 of production of oil and gas. And so to that end, we support the staff's proposed rate increase. We appreciate your guys' time and your consideration thinking through this. And if you have any questions, happy to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Samuelson. Turning to commissioners, do we have questions for Mr. Samuelson on behalf of Conservation Colorado, Logic, and Western Colorado Alliance? Okay.
Thank you.
Seeing no questions, thank you again, Mr. Samuelson. Next, we have Colorado Oil and Gas Association, and I believe they have 4 minutes since they received Creston's 2.
Yes, and Mr. Rich Coolidge is here on behalf of COGA. Mr. Coolidge, you have been unmuted.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Rich Coolidge, and I serve as the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I wanted to start by thanking staff for updating its recommendation, stay below the statutory cap, and provide more breathing room for the industry and the agency. The increase of 0.6 mils is a tough pill to swallow, but hitting the cap for the first time in decades gave us pause, especially in today's economic climate. The updated revenue forecast and new staff recommendation was the right move. As you know, the industry is facing low commodity prices and reduced activity as a result of the global pandemic and other factors. We recognize that these challenges also impact the COGCC's revenues and other areas like public education and local governments. There is no one more eager to bounce back and help get our economy moving again than Colorado's energy workers and their families. As our industry faces these cutbacks, we know local and state governments are facing similar reductions and asked to do more with less. While COGA does support the staff recommendation, this decision wasn't easy. We have supported similar mill levy increases in the past, but under different economic conditions. Obviously, this request during an economic downturn required more consideration. And as we said in our pre-hearing statement, we hope to see the mill levy adjusted again when commodity prices recover and the COGCC's budget is back in order. Lastly, we see our relationship as the regulated community as a partnership with the COGCC. Our abilities to function effectively for Colorado are intertwined, and if these dollars can help continue key priorities like remediating orphan wells, then we're all for it. Additionally, as COGCC staff stated in its cost-benefit analysis, these dollars will also prevent delays in permitting reviews and decisions. As we hope for a speedy recovery, we need the COGCC to be ready to efficiently review current and future permits so we can get our small businesses and local energy employees working. Thank you for your consideration of these comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Coolidge, for those comments. Questions from commissioners to Mr. Coolidge? All right, seeing none, appreciate the comments again. We will now move to Creston, who has 2 minutes. Ms. Larson, do you want to unmute the Creston, whomever may be presenting on behalf of Creston?
Yes, it'll be Mr. Jason Oates. And one moment while we unmute Mr. Oates.
I see him. Oh, you're unmuted, Mr. Oates.
We good?
Yep.
All right. Good morning, Commissioners, Director Murphy, and staff and members of the public. My name is Jason Oates, and I am the Director of External Affairs for Crestone Peak Resources. Crestone understands the Commission's current budget situation and shares its concerns related to falling revenues associated with lower commodity prices, lower production volumes, and the continuing response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Crestone greatly appreciates Director Murphy and the Commission staff's time and work on Rule 310 and the corresponding statement of basis and purpose, and we support the staff's proposed changes to both. Crestone takes a progressive and thoughtful approach to oil and gas operations in Colorado. As one of the most active oil and gas operators in Colorado, Crestone is continually reviewing and analyzing data related to the production volumes, commodity prices, taxes, and other inputs impacting our development plans several years in the future. As the Commission continues to analyze next steps related to the conservation mill levy, Crestone wishes to be a resource for the Commission in this process and assist in developing a source of data or other financial modeling to support future mill levy justifications. Thank you all for the time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Oates, for those comments. Questions from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, we'll continue. The Small Operator Society is up next. Is that Ms. Fanning?
Yes, it is. And Ms. Fanning, you are unmuted.
Thank you. Good morning, Director Murphy, Chairman, and Commissioners. My name is Tricia Fanning. I'm the Director of Small Operator Society. SOS is a coalition of nearly 60 small oil and gas companies consisting almost exclusively of family-owned and operated businesses with assets mainly in the rural areas of Colorado. SOS operators are unique. The owner of our companies wear multiple hats to maintain the success of their operations, from working the wellhead, managing and maintaining compliance, to being their own accountants. SOS companies, like many others in the state, have been faced with a notable amount of economic hardship, extremely low oil and gas prices, along with the significant overall regulations at multiple agencies, while trying to continue to operate, pay their employees and service companies, is an extreme financial burden for many of our members. Our operators have seen multiple downturns, but facing a worldwide pandemic is a curveball that was unexpected for all. The welfare of our state is dependent on our industry providing affordable energy and revenue to our local communities to support the basic physical and well-being of the people. Conducting a mill levy increase amongst all of this is just another hit to our industry that provides this necessity to us all. SOS recognizes while an adjustment has been made to raise the mill levy to below the statutory cap, we as a regulated community would like the Commission to truly recognize our own stated justifications for this increase at this time. Commission's ability to provide timely and efficient review of our permit applications, timely respond to the technical inquiries from our operators regarding compliance with the rules, and timely processing of our forms and other approvals. SOS members ask that with this increase, you make a concerted effort to work diligently on processing these necessary documents in a timely manner so our operators can continue to succeed during this arduous rulemaking process. Please have staff work diligently on the permitting backlog so when then prices increase, we are capable of moving forward with exploration and production. Furthermore, please revisit your formula to not only focus on commodity price, production, and levy rate, but consider that SOS members are continually faced with significant operational cost increases, not only from the ever-changing regulatory environment, but technological advances to meet and exceed the expectations of the public. Our industry prides itself in the product that we provide, and we will continue to be resilient in our efforts to do it safely while protecting public health, welfare, and environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fanning, for your comments on behalf of Small Operator Society. Questions from commissioners? All right, seeing none. Well, Ms. Fanning, let me ask you this. So in summary, it sounds like the Small Operator Society is comfortable with the proposed increase. You have caveated that with ensuring that the commission is doing the things that it ought to be doing and regulating. Is that fair assessment?
I think that's an accurate statement. I think overall the increase right now is burdensome, obviously, for small operators. Like I stated, we are unique in nature where typically the owner is doing a little bit of everything. We don't have, our members, our operators don't typically have a deep amount of staff that support everything. So, you know, with continued regulations surmounting on top of then adding a mill levy increase, especially as what was noted from commissioners, you know, when we see that there is a pool of money that is sitting aside, I think we're willing to adjust. We'll accept the 1.5, but we definitely would not be very happy to see it go up to 1.7 at this time. But we do wish to keep the dialogue open. I think we would stand behind Jason Oates' statement to say that, you know, our members would definitely love to be part of a stakeholder engagement. We had a good conversation with Director Murphy a week ago with regards to the approach to how these numbers were given, but we can't control the commodity price and operational costs, just like they're a burden to you with your staff, are a burden to our operators with SOS.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Seeing no other questions from commissioners, we'll continue to our last stakeholder and party participant, that is West Slope Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I see Chelsea Mira, are you presenting?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. And you're unmuted because we just heard you.
Wonderful. Well, this is the first time my microphone has worked this week, so I'm glad technology is working. Good morning, Chair Robbins and Commissioners. Like you mentioned, my name is Chelsea Mira. I'm the Executive Director of West Slope Colorado Oil and Gas Association. We represent operators and companies west of the Continental Divide who operate in dry gas basins, very different from the DJ Basin many Coloradans and probably yourselves are familiar with in Weld County, which is a liquids-rich play. Being such, the economics of our operations are unique, and we've had to tighten our belts over the past years. The original proposal to raise the mills to the statutory cap was daunting to many of our operators, and just as COGA and API and Small Operators Society have stated, we appreciate the updated revenue forecast and the recommendation by staff of the smaller increase. As the regulated entities, we understand the necessity of a well-funded commission as a priority. We have all been under serious exercises to implement fiscal measures to maintain solvency and intimately understand how complicated that is. West Slope COGA had the same difficult conversations throughout our membership to come to support this proposal. West Slope COGA is hopeful that as commodity prices and activity return, the Commission will revisit and lower the mills based on ever-changing market conditions. To that point, after further discussion with staff, we would like to verbalize our revised position to remove a request for a sunset provision, as the COGCC staff understands the need to revisit the subject somewhat often. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the expectation and hope that as the Commission and staff address increasing our fees for permits, they don't become onerous and we create the necessary balances so that safe, clean, and reliable natural gas can be produced to ensure residents, businesses, schools, and hospitals across the state and region have access to energy necessary to maintain our health and well-being. To close, I'd like to reiterate the COGCC staff statement in its economic impact analysis that these critical dollars will prevent delays in permitting reviews and decisions. This is critical so that we can get the women and men back to work to provide reliable and clean natural gas to our hospitals, homes, schools, and businesses. Oh, it's not scrolling, sorry. Thank you for your time and your consideration in this important rulemaking.
Thank you, Ms. Mira, for your testimony, and thank you for expressing the position of West Slope COGA of support. And I also appreciate the removal of the sunset request. I think that we've heard from everyone, and I think you've heard from the commissioners that this issue will remain one that is fluid as we think about these issues. So questions from commissioners for Ms. Miera? All right, seeing none, Ms. Larson, I turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So on our agenda, we had a break scheduled after party presentations, and then following that break, we have commissioner deliberations set up. So if you and the commissioners would like to take a brief break, we can certainly do that, or if you want to continue on with the agenda, we can. I believe Mr. Davenport may have a few remarks with respect to the record before you enter into commissioner deliberations, but that is the lay of the land at this point.
Commissioners, I'm comfortable plowing ahead. Is it thumbs up? Does that sound okay? Okay. Mr. Attorney General Davenport.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Larson, for the intro for raising the issue. Commissioners, we have discussed closing the record specifically at our last hearing. That's a procedural step. It means that you have received all the substantive information that you need about the rulemaking. So my suggestion is that we follow this process, that you now have an opportunity to ask questions of the parties or staff, any substantive question that you have of the parties or staff. And then you consider closing the record, which would be a motion and vote by the commission to do that. At that point, you can enter into deliberations and presumably vote on the proposed rule by staff. Do you have any questions about that process?
That's pretty clear to me, Attorney General Davenport. Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, we would ask commissioners if anyone has any further questions of any of the parties who presented today or who are in attendance. The only question that I have is for Ms. Hill, Holly Hill of Caris. If she could be unmuted, Ms. Larson.
Yes, of course. One moment.
Hi, Ms. Hill. As you're being unmuted, so you deferred your time to Koga, who actually Mr. Coolidge didn't even use it. He went 159. But I just wanted to, I've asked this of all the parties. Is your company supportive of the 1.5? In your pre-hearing statement, you sort of just deferred to Westlope, Koga, and Koga. They've both expressed support, but as a party, I just wanted to know what your company's position is.
Yes, we support the decrease from 1.7 to 1.5.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions from commissioners, do I have a motion to close the record?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to close the record. All those commissioners in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. The record is closed. And so now, Mr. Davenport, if you want to provide us with information concerning deliberations, we've not deliberated as a body on a rulemaking. I mean, it's pretty self-evident, but did you have anything you wanted to add?
Commissioners, during deliberations, now is the time for you to express your views on the proposed rule, or in the future, whatever the proposed action is. As always, the only other thing I'll add is please obtain recognition from the chair before you speak so we make a good record. I think that's it.
Commissioners, we're now deliberating. Would anyone like to start off the deliberation?
I have a question for Mr. Davenport. I just want to know if a thumbs up is now a recognized part of Robert's rules.
Robert's rules doesn't speak specifically thumbs up. I don't recommend them for votes.
All right, fair enough.
I'll just call on folks alphabetically. Commissioner Gonzalez, do you have anything to add at this point?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Nothing really to add, but I'd like to summarize kind of my thoughts on what I've heard today and what I've read leading up to this. First of all, I truly appreciate the staff's second look at internal costs and really the needs for this mill levy and what the new target is. I think they took a prudent and pragmatic approach, and I think they're acting accordingly. It's important to all of us, to all Coloradans, to have a well-functioning and robust regulatory body for oil and gas in this state. And it has to be well-funded along with that. And so that's kind of my thoughts on the matter. And I appreciate everyone who's presented and who made public comment prior.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. Commissioner McGowan, did you have anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm very appreciative of the staff work that went into putting together all the information. It's very helpful. I also realize, coming from a different state agency, that it's hard to discuss raising fees on folks, but we also have a statutory responsibility and things that staff have to do to meet our obligations. And I'm appreciative that staff also looked at their own budget and what we could do to make cuts to, show that we're doing our part too. Also, given the economic climate as a whole for the state, we're all in a situation where we have to look hard at every dollar. And appreciative that industry is supportive of and understanding that we have a program to run and responsibilities that we have. And so I echo Commissioner Gonzalez's thoughts too, that I think the whole thing has been put together thoughtfully. And I'm appreciative of everyone's input today.
Thank you, Commissioner McGowan. Commissioner Mesner, did you have anything further to add?
No, I just want to acknowledge the staff presentation and the responsibility and effort put into the rulemaking. And also acknowledge that we've got unanimous support from all of the parties in this rulemaking for the 1.5 mil. I do think it's our responsibility to both be fiscally responsible, but also to ensure that we have the resources available to implement our responsibilities and our mission as a regulatory body and to implement the mission of SB 19181. I do want to just make a couple of notes. You know, I think that there are a couple of line items in the budget that we'll address in the upcoming months through the financial assurances rulemaking, whether that's permit fees, whether that's, you know, adjustments in bonding financial assurances. And, you know, as we do that, that may affect future budgets and would potentially enable us to relook at, you know, what the mill is. I do like the idea of regular check-ins as far as, you know, where we're at with the budget, where we're at in the budget actual versus projected. I do like the cost-benefit analysis that was provided, understanding that we don't need to do that too often because I know that that's a significant burden to be able to accomplish those, but I do think that's beneficial. But I think at least twice a year, having a check-in regarding the budget is certainly of benefit, I believe. Yeah, I think that's the end of my comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. Rounding out, Commissioner Nanjapa, did you have any comments?
I just wanted to echo what my fellow commissioners have said, and you know, again, thank Director Murphy and the staff for the information provided. And just again to reiterate that I think, you know, taking that second look was a important thing to do to make sure that we're looking at this increase in the most effective way in terms of how we can cover our obligations to implement the law and how we can also be responsible to the stakeholders and ensure that we're not increasing more than we need. But also recognizing, as Commissioner Messner just mentioned, that there will be additional changes that may change the landscape. And so I also was thinking that at least twice a year for those updates on where we are with our projected and actual expenses, so that we can make a better evaluation. I would welcome quarterly updates, but definitely don't want to burden staff capacity. So at least, I agree, I think at least twice a year would be very helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner. I echo my fellow commissioners' statements. I'm pleased to, first off, I having served as director and having worked with Ms. Murphy and our finance staff, I know the sheer amount of work that goes into trying to delicately walk the balance that is called for by the statute, and sincerely express my appreciation to staff for that work, to Wendy Schultz and to Kat, as well as to Mike Hickey. So thank you for all of that. I'm also, you know, comfortable to see that we have 100% support for the proposed rule at its 1.5 mil. That is something that I think is a positive outcome. I look forward to all of our rulemakings being like this, with 100% support for the direction that we're going. With that, I think we're looking for a motion. Then I think the motion needs to reflect the 1.5 and also needs to reflect providing staff to adjust the statement of basis and purpose to reflect the 1.5 as well. Mr. Davenport, anything further on the motion from your perspective?
No, I think that's sufficient motion. The only thing that I would add, and you know, the commission doesn't necessarily have to make it part of the specific motion regarding the rule, but if the commission has specific direction to the director about how often to provide the update, and I will obviously let the director chime in or suggest that you check in with the director, that it would be good to provide that specific direction to the director.
Let me have Ms. Murphy unmuted. Do you have some perspective you'd like to share with Commission regarding updates?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioners. I think as we're all navigating into a new relationship and a new orientation between full-time commissioners and full-time staff, at this point I would recommend quarterly updates. I think it gives you enough touch with what we're doing, and then we can always adjust that as appropriate, and if it's too much information or if it's too frequent or too infrequent, we can change course. But I think as you're getting to know us, kind of at a more granular level, that strikes the right balance for me.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Do we have a motion then?
I can make a motion for approval of the draft rules with the adjustment of the mill to 1.5 and acknowledging the need to provide quarterly updates, budget updates. And what was the other piece that you wanted included in there?
Just
Mr.
direction to
Davenport?
staff. I think direction to staff to adjust the statement of basis and purpose to
That's
reflect
right,
the
yeah.
145.
And direction to staff to adjust the statement of basis and purpose to the 1.5 mil level.
Attorney General Davenport, is that motion sufficient from your perspective?
Sounds good to me.
Then do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, we have a second and we have a motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries and the rule is adopted. Thank you to all of the participants for your participation. We on our schedule, we are running well ahead of time. Ms. Larson, the next point was staff presentation on the oil and gas location assessment form to a permitting process. That's an educational piece, I understand.
That is correct. And Mr. Duranlo, our oil and gas location assessment manager and environmental manager, is able to make that presentation. He is in the meeting at the moment.
Do we want to move directly into that, commissioners, or take another break? What's your pleasure?
I'm good to keep it rolling if all the other commissioners are as well.
Mr. Duranlo, are you ready to roll?
Give us one moment and we'll make Mr. Duranlo a co-host, and we will get him set up and ready to go.
Great.
Mr. Duranlo, you should be a co-host now and ready to present.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Larson. Let's see. And I trust everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Good morning, commissioners. Chairman Robbins, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Greg Duranlo. I'm the environmental manager. A little background about myself. I was hired to the COGCC in 2010 as the oil and gas location assessment supervisor, and I have been the environmental manager since 2014. So today I'm going to walk through our oil and gas location assessment Form 2A. I'm going to provide some history of the Form 2A, purpose of the Form 2A, provide some statistics, talk about the process for both operators and staff, and then just touch on the impacts of Senate Bill 19-181 to the Form 2A and to the Form 2A process. I'd be happy to take questions along the way, but I will certainly be available for questions at the end. Because of the way I'm managing my screen, I may have trouble seeing someone raise their hand, but certainly if any of the commissioners wish to interrupt me, I'm fine with that. So before 2009, from the 1950s up to 2009, it took a single permit to drill a well for oil and gas in Colorado. The mineral rights carried the day, and a single vertical well took a single APD, and the surface was generally permitted, just above the well. In 2009, we had seen a significant increase in directional drilling on the west slope in the Piceance Basin, and House Bill 07-1341 and House Bill 07-1298 were adopted by the legislature in response to that boom on the west slope primarily. And so those legislative actions required COGCC to undertake a significant rulemaking, and one of the outcomes of that rulemaking was the second permit process, the Form 2A, that provided for the evaluation and assessment of the surface impacts associated with oil and gas development. Around that same time, the activity on the west slope was declining, and the activity over in the DJ Basin was increasing, and we wound up with the superposition of oil and gas development and residential communities on the Front Range. That led to the setback rulemaking of initiated in 2012 and effective in 2013. And then that was shortly followed by the Governor's Task Force rulemaking of 2015, which further developed the setback requirements that were put in place in 2013. Following that, the school setback rulemaking of 2017, ultimately effective in January of 2019, provided for additional setbacks around schools. And then, as you all are aware, in 2019, the legislature also passed SB 19-181, which has had some significant effects for the Form 2A. So the purpose of the Form 2A is to evaluate proposed oil and gas locations for potential risks to public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, including wildlife resources. Our staff determines whether potential impacts can be avoided by changing location, design, or operational practices, or whether potential impacts can be minimized through engineering or administrative controls, or whether unavoidable impacts must be mitigated. Our staff reviews and evaluates best management practices for their efficacy. We develop reasonable and necessary conditions of approval in those instances where the rules, orders, and best management practices may not provide sufficient coverage. So originally, the COGCC oil and gas location assessment staff was 4 location assessment specialists, 1 supervisor, and housed in the environmental unit, as it still is today. And we work closely with the permitting unit, who also has a technical role in the review of the Form 2A. With the advent of SB 19-181, and really with the development of the rules prior to that, the complexity of the Form 2A has grown over the years. And so likewise, our staff was grown to 7 specialists, 1 senior OGLA specialist, and still the OGLA supervisor. And we still work closely with the permitting unit on our reviews. And so just a little bit about our staff. The job class of a location assessment specialist is an EPS 2. That's an environmental protection specialist 2. Generally, our staff has an education in the sciences and earth sciences, geology, biology, geophysics. We have 6 members of our staff with advanced degrees, and our background is in environmental consulting, regulatory, and industry, with an average of over 20 years experience in those job classes. And some just general numbers, since the Form 2A has come into place, established in 2009. And you can see immediately, industry was active, flooding us with permits. From 2011 to 2013, we saw the development shift. It had already really shifted in 2009 from single wells to multi-well pads with directionally drilled wells, which, we were probably averaging 4 to 10 wells per oil and gas location. The shift to horizontal wells from 2011 to 2013 was also the shift from the Piceance Basin to the DJ Basin here in the Front Range. The setback rules adopted in early 2013 and effective in August of 2013. You'll notice that I'll see if you can find my cursor here, the arrow doesn't quite line up. There's a spike in permits that we received, and yet the setback rules came into place right after that. There was a rush to permitting before those setback rules went into place. Many of those sites, were then built following that, and there was many of those sites were close to neighborhoods and close to homes, which ultimately resulted in numerous ballot measures in 2014, that ultimately led to Governor Hickenlooper's task force on oil and gas that provided for ultimately the task force rulemaking, which was effective in February of 2016. The cumulative numbers that track along here, you can see the split between the Form 2As received over the years and the Form 2As approved over the years. To date, we've received 12,500 Form 2As, and we've approved 11,300. We have 450 Form 2As currently in backlog. And so that leaves 750, or about 6% of the total Form 2As that have been submitted, that have been removed from processing, removed from our workflow, either withdrawn by the operator, rejected by COGCC staff, or ultimately deleted from the record. So I wanted to point that out because there's oftentimes a statement that COGCC doesn't ever deny any permits. And I think it's important to note that we also don't approve every permit we see. Many of those are sent back to the operators for them to rework either the location or the details of the location to give us something that could be approved. This is just a closer look of some of the recent permitting activity since 2017. And again, going back to the previous slide, you can see, I mean, the activity that we saw up to 2013 was very, very high. And then since 2013 has been significantly lower with a bit of a spike in 2018. So this just details that spike, shows the average number of Form 2As received and processed, received and approved over those time periods. And right now we are at a very low volume, historically, of both forms coming in the door and forms being approved. So just moving on to process, I want to talk a bit about what the operators go through prior to submitting their forms to us. By the time a Form 2A comes in the door, operators are significantly invested in their proposal. It can start 6, 12, 18 months or more prior to the Form 2A submittal with mineral leasing. So first, the operators have to secure the mineral rights to develop an area. They'll go through a review process and look for favorable locations from which to develop the minerals, and engage in surface negotiations with the landowners. Their first choice landowner may not be favorable, may not want to do business with them, and so they may move along to a different landowner. Directional drilling has certainly made that possible, and horizontal drilling has taken that another step further. Once they have the surface rights, they'll conduct site surveys and start to do their site design, lay out roads, lay out the location, how their facilities are going to be placed on the landscape. And then typically they will engage in local or federal processes. So if the local government requires permits, they'll engage with the local government. If they are on federal land, throughout that whole process I already mentioned, they will be working with the federal government. COGCC's rules require pre-application notices be sent to local governments and immediate neighbors and the surface owner. So they'll make notices. They may conduct on-site consultations before they even submit their permit to us. Those may include COGCC, they may include local governments, they may include landowners, they may include Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And then they'll submit a draft Form 2A and attachments. So again, this process can take 18 months, can cost upwards of $100,000 of investment to get to this point in this stage in the game where they're submitting an application to us. COGCC then starts our review process, and it begins with a completeness check. This is a cursory review of a Form 2A application to make sure things like all the data fields are filled out, to make sure that the attachments open and are named properly. At this stage in the game, we're not even looking to make sure that the attachment, let's say a location drawing, is of the correct location. We're making sure that it's a location drawing that is named properly. The technical review will get into the fact of whether or not it's the right location drawing. This is just to make sure that we have an application that can be reviewed by staff, can be posted for public consumption, and is something that we can work with. If the location is within a buffer zone, which were zones established in the 2013 setback rulemaking, it will also undergo a buffer zone completeness review, in which we look for additional attachments and review best management practices to make sure appropriate best management practices have been applied to the site plans before it even comes in the door. Once a Form 2A passes completeness, it moves on to a technical review, and that's where our location assessment staff and our permitting staff really dig into the form. Now they'll take that location drawing. If there's any problems with it, they'll kick it back to the operator and work to get the right location drawing, etc. Once the form passes completeness, that also triggers all of the consultation requirements and the public comment period. Typical permits are subject to a 20-day public comment period. A local government can request a public comment period be extended by 10 days to 30 days. And certain applications for large urban mitigation area facilities are subject to an automatic 40-day public comment period. The consultations with Colorado Parks and Wildlife or Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment are 40-day consultations, and the local government consultations are subject to the timeframes of the essentially of the public comment period. So 20, 30, or 40 days, depending on the circumstance. COGCC will review the information obtained during the consultation process, and will review all public comments received. And now, since the passage of SB 19181, we also conduct an objective criteria review. The objective criteria were put into place to ensure that new applications for oil and gas locations were being reviewed under a higher level of scrutiny that would be consistent with the overall mission change required by SB 19181. So any applications that meet certain criteria, such as having a building unit within a certain distance, or being within a local municipality, or being close to a municipal boundary, being proposed in a hydrologically sensitive area, any of those types of situations would trigger additional review, additional discussion with the operators, enhanced best management practices for their operations, et cetera. So once all that is done, and our review covers the scale and the setting of the project. We look at the cultural setting of the project. We look at environmental sensitivities in that review, the hydrology, the land use, wildlife, soil types, plant communities. We review the exploration and waste management proposals by the operator. The operator's got a space to make comments on the Form 2A that describe in further detail certain aspects of their plans. We'll go through all of that. We may conduct site visits. We may have on-site consultations, and we'll go through all of that before the permit is ultimately recommended for a final review by the director. And that's the last step is the final review. And with the director's objective criteria review, the director's already seen the permit and been able to review it. As far as numbers go, I would guess it's about 3/4 of the applications that are received and reviewed right now are going through that objective criteria review. And only then can we ultimately approve a permit. Just a couple of issues that I want to touch on in this process. We review numerous attachments to the Form 2A, but there are limitations to those attachments. The attachments are spelled out in rules, and you all will have an opportunity, if you haven't already, to look through those attachments, and the proposed draft rules for mission change certainly include some changes to the attachments and changes to the drawings and maps that are required. At the same time, COGCC can ask for additional information as necessary in order to make a determination on the application. So at any time during the review process, we're able to ask for further information. Rule 604 C2EI is a rule covering multi-well production facilities and has enhanced COGCC staff ability to ask for siting rationale and even alternative location analyses during our review process. So where there's a multi-well production facility, we're able to ask the operator, is this as far as it can be from the nearby building units or residences? And if not, we can seek to make improvements with the operator to improve their site design. Our processes allow for significant involvement from the relevant local government, but sometimes neighboring jurisdictions have felt left out of our process. And that's why we developed an objective criteria to, look at those proximate local governments and reach out to them, make sure that haul routes or their residents are being protected through our permitting process. Our public comment reviews can be pretty lengthy. We've gotten upwards of 500 public comments on individual permits. And I'd like to point out that in 2009, when the commission then adopted a requirement for public comments on our permits, that was first in the nation for state-issued oil and gas permits. We do receive site-specific and relevant comments, and sometimes we receive a lot of form letter comments. Very high volumes from time to time, and other times just a very specific and pointed comment that we can work with the operator to resolve. And then, one other thing, the operator does have the ability to request a hearing before the commission on any application that's been in process for longer than 75 days. Since 2009, there's been only a handful of those hearings requested. Typically, when a permit is taking a long time, there's a lot of back and forth with the operator, and they're pretty well aware of what the issues might be. So that's just some details on what goes into the OGLA review before we get to the final approval.
Greg, can I ask a few questions on that before you move on to the next one, or do you want to wait till the...
No, Commissioner Messner, I'm fine taking your questions now.
Thank you. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, because I'm assuming as you go through technical review, even completeness, are receiving the different consultations as well as public comment, that there may be requests to the operator to make adjustments to the application, to be adjustments to the location, to make adjustments to the operations. How does that dance work? Because I know that, depending on what the review timelines are, or what the asks are, the changes are, the need to meet some of the conditions that the consultations may create. So how does that all work in the timeliness and the adjustment of it before it gets to the final approval?
I think that's a great question, and I appreciate you asking. So I would say the first thing is we have put in place a staff process for rejecting applications that are in process. It hinges on the attachments, and if there are numerous problems with attachments, it becomes very time consuming and labor intensive to make the changes to attachments, swap out attachments. And then typically, if an attachment is erroneous, there's similar errors in the data fields. And so we wind up having to go back and change those too. It bogs down the process. And if we have, 10 operators submitting applications, and 5 of them are submitting good applications, but we're spending a lot of time on the 5 that are submitting applications that require a lot of changes, we're not being very efficient and effective with our review. So we made the determination that the best thing to do in those cases are to kick them back to the operator, and they basically start over with those permits. So it's a big deal. The The other issue is if we make significant changes to a form that's in process, and let's say we make those changes after the public comment period, then the public maybe hasn't had the opportunity to review and comment what the director is ultimately making their decision on. And so that's one reason that during the Governor's Task Force rulemaking, we did modify the public comment period to give the director the discretion to reopen a public comment period. And we've definitely exercised that discretion from time to time where we felt that there was enough public interest in an application and significant enough changes to the application materials that we should really reopen it and let people sort of re-review that. Anytime we extend or reopen the comment period, we post a notice on our homepage. So, you know, it's one of the first things that you can see in the banner of information on the homepage. And so likewise with local government discussions, with our consultation process, if we've had a consultation resolve and then the operator proposes changes, yeah, we're going to re-engage that consultative partner, if you will, and make sure that they understand the changes and that their consultation still stands. And we've engaged that a couple of times. You know, the other thing that oftentimes happens is, again, if we make those significant changes, we'll, you know, remove the permit from our system and have them reapply so that it triggers all those time periods again. Did that answer your question?
No, thank you. That's helpful. And then prior to final approval or during the process of final approval, I assume that there's conditions often put on that approval based on your technical review, as well as potentially some of the consultations that occurred and perhaps even public comment.
Yes, absolutely. And the rule specifically says that, you know, the director can put necessary and reasonable conditions to, you know, as necessary based on public comment or consultation or our own review. One of the things one of the tools we rely on is best management practices. We will work with an operator to get, you know, very detailed best management practices when necessary on a permit, where the operator is committing to specific ways of conducting business on the site. And the reason we do this is because oftentimes a condition of approval, we can't engineer their site for them. We need them to engineer their site. So we'll talk with them in the back and forth and determine what we need them to achieve with a certain protection measure. And then they will tell us how they plan to engineer into that solution. And we'll, you know, then we'll review that and say, well, we like that, except you've included this language that says, if necessary, or if necessary, we'll do this. And we're telling you right now, it's necessary on this site. So if you want to go ahead and remove those words, if necessary, we'll adopt this as a BMP on your permit. It's still an enforceable part of the permit. And it is essentially a condition under which we approve the permit. So those best management practices are commitments by the operator that we can certainly hold them accountable to.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Any other questions from any other commissioners before I move on? Thank you. So just a little bit more on process and some of the tools that COGCC staff relies on. All of our forms are based in eForms, which is a pretty powerful tool for us, albeit old and outdated. It's built on a Silverlight platform, which is going away soon. But nonetheless, the forms basically allow data that's populated into the form to enter directly into our database. So it's a great tool. If we work with the operator and modify the form, ultimately the database will reflect the modifications. We rely on COGCC's rules in every decision and determination we make. It's not uncommon in times of in the before times before COVID to for operators to meet with COGCC staff, and everyone on the COGCC staff walks into the room with the red binder of rules in their hands. The application materials, obviously what the operator provides to us, are determinant in what we are reviewing. The level of detail on their attachments is critical to our review, and the level of accuracy on their materials is also critical to our review. One of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal is the COGCC GIS online maps, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But let it be said that this tool is I would say nation leading in our ability to convey information about a given site that we're reviewing. Staff may conduct a site visit or a site inspection. We obviously rely on our consultative partners, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And we have the ability to reach out to them even if it's not a specific site that required a consultation. And our local government partners as well. And then staff resources. We have 120 members of our staff with varying expertise. We may call in someone from our engineering group who's got a civil engineering background to review sort of a cut and fill proposal on a site. Or we might we'll definitely work with our partners in the permitting group to understand the drilling and spacing units that are affecting the location selection by an operator. Circling back to our map tool, and I realize right now that I should have really put in a picture of our map because it would have been better to look at than these words. But nonetheless, the map tool on the external side, what the public views, is a really, really powerful tool. On the internal side, we have access to many more layers that aren't publicly available because of the sensitivities of the sources. But first of all, we have all of the facilities that are contained within COGCC's database are mapped on our map. So we can see existing and planned oil and gas locations. We can see well permits. We can see existing wells. We can see the well status. We can see, pits and environmental issues like spills and remediation projects. Our rules and policies are even shown on our maps. For example, areas that are covered by notice to operators, or areas that are subject to 317B, public water system supply. Protections are shown on our maps. Water wells, lakes, rivers, streams, designated groundwater basins, floodplains, wetlands. We can review environmental sites such as CERCLA sites and UMTRA sites and hazardous waste sites. Our wildlife maps are available both internally and externally, both in aggregate, here's the layer of all the sensitive wildlife habitat versus here's the layer of a specific species that we're concerned about. Surface features such as, school districts, childcare facilities, municipal boundaries are all shown on our maps, topo maps, and we reach out and use Google Earth, and our maps directly link to Google Earth, so we can see more current aerial imagery. And also we have county assessor parcels shown on our maps. And then our staff also rely on the county assessor's maps themselves to review parcel information. I can't say enough how powerful that online map tool is. It's an amazing resource. You know, much of what we do is possible, especially in this COVID-19 state of working from home, is possible because of that powerful map tool. And you know, so shout out to Chris Eisinger and Dennis Alstrand and Jane Stanczyk's group for keeping that map going. And shout out to Ken Robertson and Bryce Holder for keeping the interface between our database and those maps going. And so one other tool that I didn't mention was developed this last year, and this is the Form 2A mitigation toolbox. So I mentioned that we developed the objective criteria under SB 19181, and what you see here, and it's a little bit hard to see, but the columns on the left are the individual objective criteria, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5A, 5B, 5C, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. And then the columns on the right are mitigation measures that operators can use this toolbox, identify various issues to mitigate against and tools to mitigate with. And so kind of zooming in a little bit on this, you can see, you know, for certain, for example, for objective criteria 6, you know, one of the issues to mitigate against would be access road nuisances. And so what can they do to reduce nuisance impacts associated with their access roads? They can find alternative paths for their access road. Maybe they're, you know, maybe if they site it on the other side of the property that they have access to, it won't be an issue for a neighborhood. They can take measures during construction to reduce dust and noise. They can, you know, make sure they're not working on the road at 9:30 p.m. They can do things to reduce noise. They can, you know, through regular maintenance, make sure that they're not creating washboarded roads that, you know, cause a lot of rattling when trucks go over them. They can make sure they're, you know, the road is aligned so that truck lights don't shine into people's homes. They could maybe use straw bales or something to mitigate those lights, and making sure that trucks aren't stacking up and idling and letting vehicle exhaust go forward. So this mitigation toolbox was developed under then Director Robbins' leadership to you know, really help operators understand what staff is looking for when some of these objective criteria are triggered. Lastly, I want to just touch on the impacts of SB 19181, and you all will become very familiar with these impacts because they will be the subject of our mission change rules. Significantly related to the oil and gas location assessment process is the shift in local government siting authority. Obviously, I've mentioned the objective criteria. That was a big consideration as we moved through the permitting process. First, we had to develop the objective criteria, which we had a month to come up with the objective criteria, receive public input on the objective criteria, and then finalize and adopt and then start implementing. The SB 19181 requires an alternative location analysis process, and so you know, you'll see that coming in the draft rules, and also requires us to work with CDPHE on the development of a cumulative impacts evaluation. And then lastly, for the Form 2A, SB 19181 requires us to kind of relook at the wildlife provisions of our rules, and that was a significant you know, significant part of SB, well, it was SB 1298 in 07, you know, required that same look, and this kind of takes it a step further. And so in the staff draft proposed rules, you will see we've addressed those changes through rules that address local government deference, how COGCC will defer to local government permitting decisions. We've included a provision for the oil and gas development plan, which you know, takes a more holistic look. Rather than one location, an operator can propose several locations that comprise their development area, and then we'll be able to look at all of those things at once. Our process will shift from an administrative approval by the director to the commission will approve Form 2As in the oil and gas development plans. So instead of the director issuing the final decision, the director will issue a recommendation to the commission. We remain, you know, we continue our consultation processes, but we have made changes to our consultation processes with Parks and Wildlife, with the Department of Public Health and Environment, and we've also will propose to include public water systems and those suppliers in our consultation process. And then we've also changed some of the attachments, and we've included numerous plans so that we get a more detailed look at how the operator intends to conduct their operations and how they intend to comply with our rules. And so with that, I will turn it back to you all and invite your questions.
And Greg, before we do that, I would suggest to commissioners that we keep questions to sort of current state, which is objective criteria, permitting, and the 2A process, as opposed to questions about the upcoming mission change rules, because we'll be opening that hearing up on August 24th. So if commissioners could kind of, what we wanted to do here today, or what I believe the director wanted to do here today, was give a glimpse into current state, so that as we're reading pre-hearing statements and looking at where potential future state may go, we can be informed. So if commissioners could do that, that would be great.
And thank you for that clarity, Chairman. I definitely meant to say that at the beginning of my presentation and skipped it. So thank you for that clarity.
Yep. Commissioners, questions? And I can't see all of you, so just open up if you want to ask a question.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Sure. Thank you very much for the presentation. Much appreciated. I've got a question about conflicts with operators when it comes to the 2A submittals or approvals. How often do you get operators that have competing interests or competing applications, more importantly, for kind of the same area? And how does that go into the staff's evaluation of those 2As?
So it does happen from time to time. Primarily, that is a mineral estate issue. You know, you may have competing well bores going east to west and overlapping someone's proposal or desire to propose wells going north and south. You know, historically, that's been dealt with on a sort of first permit is the one that it gets reviewed. And that's really not the way we deal with it anymore. And in fact, our Form 2As now can come in, you know, can come in independent of the APDs, of the Form 2 application for permit to drill. And so we would therefore evaluate each Form 2A on its own merits, and we could conceivably approve 2 Form 2As that actually had competing mineral interests and let the mineral interests, you know, sort themselves out through, you know, either our permitting process of the well bores or through, you know, civil civil process. I don't think we've had any go that far. I think what we've kind of done is said, hey, it looks like we've got competing interests here. Let's figure this out and decide. And some of those have been, you know, I can think of one instance that really stayed in process, you know, for a long time. Neither operator requested their, you know, 75-day hearing. It just stayed in process until they sorted it out, and one operator withdrew their application and we approved the other.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Messner.
Thanks. And thank you, Greg, again, for a great presentation. Just a couple of questions. I mean, I'm coming from local government that also has oil and gas regulations to this role. Even within the local government regulatory process, there are times that we've been accused of not denying oil and gas applications. But oftentimes we actually have put conditions of approval or made modifications to those particular applications, or where the applicant actually just withdrew the application because they knew that it was going to get denied, and so rather than having it denied, they either withdrew the application or, you know, took a pause until they could make the adjustments and then reapplied. And I know that you gave some stats on that, but I guess I was just wanting to go a little deeper as far as how often that occurs, because sometimes when applications get submitted and it goes through technical review, there's enough adjustments made to it that you're actually taking an application that, you know, should the applicant push it all the way through to the end, it would have gotten denied. But instead, there was enough modifications made to it that it went from what would have been a denial to something that got approved.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess from the data I presented earlier, you know, 6% of the applications that we've received over the years have not, you know, have been removed from processing before they reach that goalpost. You know, probably 25% of the applications that we have approved have had significant, you know, adjustments made to them as part of our approval process, and have had, you know, best management practices fleshed out in more detail, or, you know, maybe required things like shifting the access roads or things like that to make them, you know, less impactful and something that, you know, we're more comfortable approving. You know, I would say the vast majority of applications that come in the door will have, you know, edits made by staff as part of the review process, right? It's very hard to submit a perfect permit application when you're filling out, you know, a couple hundred data fields and providing a dozen attachments. You know, you're gonna have something that's fat fingered, and you know, that's why we have also multiple layers of review. You know, where we have, you know, that the completeness check, the technical review. You know, one thing I did not mention was a process that we have, which is a final review, which is, you know, kind of a peer level review internally, and then ultimately the director's objective criteria review and the director's final review, which is done by senior level staff. And so, I mean, all of those reviews, we will oftentimes, you know, we'll have a permit in process for a couple hundred days, and at, you know, in the very last, you know, it's getting ready to go to get the director's signature on it, and we find, you know, a small error that goes back to the operator and then comes back in corrected. So we really do make every effort to get them right before they go out the door.
Right. And is there, I mean, as you're going through your technical review, and I know the depth of experience and knowledge that's within the departments that are doing this review. But do you run into situations where you need to like send that application out for review from an independent outside consultant, or does that not happen? You know, so whether that's a geologic hazard or whether that's you know, a proposal has, you know, significant impacts to endangered species, or, you know, whatever that may be, that you may not have that expertise in-house, that you send it out for outside consultant, or typically do you have the expertise necessary for those reviews?
You know, we do, we have a really wide range of expertise in our staff, both in our location assessment team and throughout, you know, we have tremendous depth throughout the staff of COGCC. You know, another tool that we can rely on, you mentioned geologic hazards, is our federal partners, you know, on the West Slope, where much of the, you know, much of the land is permitted, or much of the activity is permitted on federal lands and minerals. You know, where they've conducted NEPA analyses, we can, you know, we can talk to them and consult with them about the outcome of that assessment, and you know, and review those assessments ourselves as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
And I'd also note, going back to your prior question, you know, anytime we make changes to an application, you know, the operator has certified that this is true and correct, right? So if we find something that's erroneous, we can't just make that change and move on. We do document those changes. We document the operators concur with us making those changes. And so you can, you know, if you review an approved application, you can see the record of those changes made throughout.
Other questions? Commissioner McGowan, it looks like you're unmuted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg, I'm wondering how many permits expire. So they have a 3-year window, correct? And I'm wondering how many, this is maybe a way off question, but I'm wondering how many permits, and maybe this isn't the case because you just told me how expensive it might be to fill out a permit. I was just wondering if there's like some strategy involved, like I want to be the first there and stake my claim, but I'm really not quite ready, but I'm going to fill out this permit. So I'm curious to know how many just expire, and maybe that isn't a reason that they expire, but I was wondering if you had comments or thoughts about that.
Yes, and thank you. I think that's actually not a way off base question at all. So they do, a Form 2A does expire after 3 years, and a Form 2 after 2 years. We do allow operators to refile permit applications. And so for either a Form 2 or a Form 2A, the operator can submit a refile. A refile is not an extension of a permit. It is an opportunity for COGCC to conduct a complete review as if it's a new permit application. What a refile does allow is, if nothing's changed, the operator can rely on their previously submitted information. So they might not attach all the attachments because they're already in the record for that approved well or oil and gas location. I think you are correct that an operator may be looking at a plot of acreage and say, I need to get my permits in here and get them approved, even though I am not ready to drill them they're on my 4-year time horizon. So I know that I'm going to permit them now, refile the permits, you know, at least once, and refile the Form 2A at least once. And so we conduct those reviews. You know, if, let's say, for example, they submitted the first one in 2012 and we got the refile application in 2015, we would be reviewing it under the setback rules. And so, you know, the conditions may have changed on the ground, in that, oh, it wasn't a big deal to be 1,000 feet from someone before, now it requires additional best management practices.
Can I ask another question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this might be really stupid, but do we charge a fee to submit a permit so that it pays for staff time to do all that review, or does our mill levy pay for staff time?
Yes, so the statute does allow for us to charge a fee. However, we are funded, all our staff is funded through the mill levy. So to date, we do not charge a fee.
And Commissioner McGowan, that is a rulemaking that we will undertake once we get through the mission change rulemakings. That is something that SB 19181 did provide to the commission. And I think as we heard this morning during the mill levy rulemaking, that will, I think necessarily as we think about fees, we could think about, where the mill levy is. Other questions? I can see you all now because I stopped Greg's screen sharing. So
thank you for doing that, by the way. I had meant to and forgot.
Got to figure out a way to get us all on the same page so that we can see each other for these hearings. Greg, thank you. That was very informative, and we really appreciate your putting that together for us and for the 76 stakeholders that are on the phone still or on the Zoom meeting still. I think it's helpful for the commission to get some perspective about current state as we contemplate future state. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to provide that information. I've got just a fantastic oil and gas location assessment team that just, they really work hard to get the review done and get it done right. Really talented group of individuals, and it's great to work with them. So thank you all for your time today.
I echo that commendation of your team. They are an amazing team that has been very nimble over the course of the last year and a half. And they've also not only been doing that, but they've been helped inform the mission change rulemaking. So they've done double and triple duty, and it's a great team. All right, that brings us to the conclusion of our agenda. Anybody have anything further at this point? Otherwise, we would look for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I will move to adjourn.
Great. Second by Commissioner McGowan. With that, I thank everyone for participating. I really want to thank the stakeholders for participating in the mill levy rulemaking. I find that to be successful, and it was nice to see everyone on the same page. With that motion and second, all those in favor to adjourn signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Ms. Larson, if you could adjourn us from Zoom, we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week.